Hello, my name is Richard Terry, and these are some visual thoughts on higher education policy. Well, initially, I think my own response to the first question about HE policy making is that having not been involved particularly at any level with this particular topic, I might say that from a personal point of view, and I think this is probably shared with colleagues as well, that it can seem distant, remote, a galaxy far, far away. In terms of actually writing policy, the involvement that I have had, and certainly I think this is a fairly widely held perception as well, that there seems to be a sort of ring fencing with policy that it can be exclusive and can involve, for example, sitting on certain committees, and fair enough, if you sit on the committee you have a voice, but that does mean that certain other voices can be lost, and so there is a feeling in which this sort of ring fencing of policy making can certainly give a sense of exclusion, particularly for non-academic staff in a university setting at least. And processes in terms of creating policy can therefore seem to lack democratic accountability insofar as people's views are not heard and not allowed to enter into the decision cycle for policy creation. So, question about policy in practice. How should it relate to people's practice? And I think the issue might be here about ends and means, and the question being, well, whose ends? Particularly if those ends begin at a national level, as a parliamentary level, and then are passed down for simple implementation by institutions. And there's then a question, of course, of subsidiarity and how much autonomy any individual institution has. And I think that's certainly a very important question to be interrogated in terms of policy. And also the form that policy takes. Well, in a visual environment, I think there are certain messages that can be perhaps given that would be more difficult in other forms of documentation, such as textual documentation. The danger of any kind of focus on means at the expense of ends is that it may miss the point of the policy in the first place, and the medium may then become the message. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think, will very much depend on context, but there is no doubt that that is a risk. And so, in terms of looking at visual methods, well, yes, I think it's worth exploring, perhaps especially with regard to things like student loans and part-time student numbers dwindling, for example, in the United Kingdom, but also in terms of the teaching excellence framework. Scrutiny is probably going to be very important in terms of again, coming back to the ends and the means, and the key question being who benefits, and it then becomes a very much wider question, I think. But certainly visual methods, both in terms of representation and scrutiny, could be very important indeed. So whether or not the university can learn itself from visual methods is again an open question. I think again the danger here is to get tangled up in means and lose sight of the end, so you end up with a sort of Kafkaesque or Weberian bureaucracy that expands to fill the space available without any actual attempt to resolve issues to do with democratic accountability, for example. I'm not so sure that visual media are any better at addressing the risks of this happening than textual media. And so this focus on ends rather than means it does have a danger of diverting wider participation in creating decisions into a sort of instrumentalist acceptance post hoc of those decisions, so that we end up with a sort of a Politburo approach to policy, by stealth, if you like. And I'm not sure that the medium that we communicate those policies in is necessarily going to prevent that from happening. So therefore, whilst I think the visual elements do have a place, I certainly think that we also need to keep an eye on the questions of why and with whom we're making those decisions.